My name is Bronwen and I'm an academic. Well, I used to be at least, and most of Small Media's early research reports reflected this academic background. By academic, I mean wordy and stale, you may say clean and sober. Something that most people would skim read at best. But for the past few years, as Small Media's Director of Research and Innovation, I've been working with a team to try and do things a bit differently. So thinking that there must be a better way to have our insights heard and better still seen, we brought on board designers, developers, journalists, and analysts, and came up with some more creative ways of doing things. I'll talk about just one of our projects today, but you can visit smallmedia.org.uk to find out more about our data-driven research. The project I'm talking about today is called Writer's Block, and it's our second foray into literary censorship. In 2012, we'd published a report called Cultural Censorship in Iran, A State of Emergency. And after that, we wanted to dig deeper and find out more about which books had been banned, which authors had been blacklisted, which publishing companies had been frozen out of existence since the 1979 revolution in Iran. A simple premise, perhaps, but nothing in life is ever that simple, and it wasn't like we could just phone up the Ministry of Culture and Islamic Guidance, or MCIG for short, and ask them for a list of all of the books that they'd banned. The MCIG are the gatekeepers, and nothing in Iran is performed, published, or produced without their permission. So we had to cleverly skirt around their building and find the side door. We uncovered an online database of all of the publishers established and books published since the 1979 revolution. We had metadata including author name, book title, cover price, number of copies, publishing company, and what would turn out to be a very pivotal piece of information, the Dewey Code. So we needed to scrape it. We used a tool called Outwit Hub to build our scraper and set it to work. For a period of 2 weeks, we had 5 computers running overnight, gathering all of this data. We had to time the request that we made to the website very carefully, otherwise we would be frozen out. And right in the middle of our scrape, the entire website we were scraping was redesigned, so we had to start from scratch because our queries became useless. But then success, finally we had rows and rows and rows and rows and rows and rows of data. And of course, when you have that many records, no off-the-shelf publishing tool, data processing tool, and as much as I also love Excel, would open this. So we needed to hire a back-end developer to build us a queryable database, and we set about designing some query logic to find our insights. So we had our database of published books, many of which would have inevitably been censored before they reached the shelves. We had, what we didn't have was a list of obviously the books that had been completely banned. So to find out that, we looked at which categories of books had been published over time, how that had changed during different presidencies, and we looked at what books had had massive print runs one year and maybe dropped off the radar the next. But right away, we identified some trouble spots. The 1980s was a period of stagnation due to political turmoil following the revolution. Khomeini and his new government had set about rewriting the rule book. But conversely, when Khatami, the so-called reformist president, was in power, we saw a publishing boom, followed by another sharp bust after Ahmadinejad and the conservatives took back the helm. The number of unique titles published during each presidential term grew exponentially, but one interesting outlier was the number of publishers that was founded under Khatami's presidency. This saw an opening up of the literary industry. So while changes in the country's leadership certainly had an effect on the variance of the types of books published during each administration, we wanted to measure it. And to measure it, we needed to use the Dewey Code. So we had the category of the book, but that had been arbitrarily defined by librarians as they input books into their database. But the Dewey Code was the most stable and objective piece of information that we had. So we took the first 3 numbers of the Dewey Code and mapped out an interactive tool using D3 that would enable users to explore changes in the types of books published over time. One thing hasn't changed so much, and that's the continued dominance of religious books. No great surprise, perhaps, especially given that publishers closely aligned with the regime's ideology are given a number of subsidies and support from the government. But we found that Khatami's liberal era was a boom for both foreign and domestic publishers, and especially those publishing works in European languages. After the Iranian Revolution, European languages had been viewed with suspicion, but ultimately the practical, economic, and cultural benefits of the global lingua franca were coming up trumps. Another component of our work was to code all of the first names of every single author by gender. This turned out to be a very manual task, which we then reassessed and coded any author's name, any first name that had appeared more than 150 times in the database to sample. Women were most prolific in the sphere of literature, but do appear to have been gaining ground also in the production of religious texts, which was a historically male-dominated arena. However, women do remain a minority within the publishing industry, and one author that we spoke with said, "A male writer's characters can be bold and daring. They can fall in love, smoke, swear, and cheat. But if a woman writer mentions just one of those things, it will mean outright rejection." And whereas women have made tangible gains in publishing, unfortunately the same cannot be said for Iran's linguistic minority communities. While the Iranian constitution does officially recognize minority languages, there is little in the way of literature produced to reflect this diversity. Arabic does seem to fare better than other languages, but when religious texts are removed from that equation, the number of titles published is still very low compared with the number of native Arabic speakers of the population. Among top publishing companies, we found predominantly academic publishers. These are the types of publishers that would receive paper subsidies and government support as well. And only one of those publishers had literature featured in their breakdown. So we have a lot of books being published, textbooks, science and mathematics in the education field. And independent publishers are really squeezed in Iran. In addition, publishing companies and distribution networks are very much centered in and around Tehran and also the neighboring Qom, which is the religious heart of Iran. So 64% of registered publishing companies are based in Tehran, and 76% of titles produced in Iran are produced in Tehran. So there we have it. It's a lot of numbers and also a strong narrative as well. But there was a huge team involved, and I wanted to show some of their faces. You'll recognize many of them in the room today as well. We were total newbies when it came to doing a data-driven project of this scale, even though we had experience in researching censorship. But of course, censorship is an ever-changing landscape. And in hindsight, I wish that we could have built a tool that would, in real time, take that data from the database live and present it in a live tool online so that we could assess whether, for instance, under Rouhani's administration, things have changed for better or for worse. Thank you.